Okay, we're going to call the April 3rd, 2018 meeting of the Everett Planning Commission to order. Ready? Are we ready? Okay, we're ready now. Can we begin with the roll call, please?
Commissioner Dunn?
Here.
Commissioner Lark?
Here.
Commissioner Yanasak?
Here.
Commissioner Lavra? Here. Commissioner Zielinski?
Here.
Commissioner Beck?
Here.
Chair Holland?
Here. Have the commissioners had an opportunity to review the minutes from the March 20th, 2018 meeting? And if so, any comments, corrections, or motions?
I'd move approval of the minutes.
I second that.
Any discussion? Okay, call for the vote.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yes.
Commissioner Lark?
Yes.
Commissioner Yanasak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra? Yes. Commissioner Zielinski?
Yes.
Commissioner Beck?
Yes.
Chair Holland?
Yes. Any reports from the committee reports from the planning commissioners?
Well, I have a question before
Sure.
the meeting starts. Can we clarify who the voting member is once Commissioner Tisdale joins us? As it's been in practice for the last 2 years, we alternated between myself and Alex, the other alternate.
I specifically remember, yes, we can definitely bring this up as a policy discussion between the commissioners, because especially since we have some new commissioners now. But when the second alternate was added and we had that original discussion, I was chairman at the time, and in order to keep things clean, it was discussed and agreed upon that the first alternate would vote on the first meeting, the second alternate would vote on the second meeting, and that's how it would go. We never got into an alternating thing. I've never seen anything in the minutes that talked about who the next person was, that if we didn't have a full quorum and all that, who would vote on that. But I'd be happy to take that up again with the commissioners if they want to see a different practice. So.
I don't agree. I don't remember agreeing to that practice. I remember there was the discussion, and then we discussed alternating because we don't always have 2 meetings a month. So I disagree that we decided to have alternate 1 and alternate 2 in the first and second meeting slots. And in practice, as I recall, we have alternated who voted, and the last person to vote, I think, was Alex.
I recall us always having this conversation each time we have to decide whether or not to vote, so. Yeah.
Well, that conversation hasn't been directed to me, so this is new discussion between the 2 alternates. So, again, I'd be happy for if we want to make a policy change to our bylaws or whatever it may be in order to clarify that. Again, I thought it was for the cleanest way to understand when you may go months without having a vote by the alternate, and then how are you supposed to remember which one it was? So the easiest practice was, again, as we discussed, alternate 1 would be first, alternate 2 would be second.
I'm a little confused too. Is this actually a bylaw? Is this a bylaw?
No, there was nothing that was actually acted upon. It was discussed between the planning commissioner, and it was decided that the chairman would decide who would be the voting person that night. And I said, in practice, how I would treat it is the first meeting would be the first alternate, the second meeting would be the second alternate. So that's how I've always ran it for the last 2.5 years, so.
Is it time to address this now? Because it seems like this is probably going to be, I mean, that seems like a reasonable manner to handle it in my opinion, but should we address it in terms of some sort of official act or?
Let's put it in the minutes.
Our bylaws,
Yeah, I think that it might provide clarification, because I honestly don't remember it either.
Sure. Yeah.
So I move that we actually adopt that alternate position 1 be on the first meeting of the month and alternate position 2 be on the second meeting of the month. If for any reason there are not meetings, then that's just how it is. We don't alternate the person, we alternate the position based on the first and second meeting of the month.
I guess, could I ask Commissioner Dunn, did you have a different idea about how the commission could do that?
So as I recall, in practice, we have been alternating between who is the voting member. So if we're both here, it's the only time there's a problem. So if we're both here and only one commissioner is absent, then it alternates between who is the voting person. And it could be reflected in the minutes, which I had asked for in the past. But it seems like it only comes up when we vote on cannabis, and I'm out. And I support cannabis, so
I retract my move, because I think that this isn't a major issue, because most of the time, it's part of the reason why we have alternates. There are people who are absent. So I think that we leave it to the discretion of the commission, the in attendance. I don't know how we should handle this, because I think setting laws, you know, because there's really not a significant need here, that most of the time, we're going to need both of you, because someone's missing or more people are missing. So how do we handle it? Like at a meeting where you're both in attendance and we only need one, do we vote on who the member should be? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think different people are going to have different opinion on different topics. And so when you start adding that line of confusion, you get to a point where, okay, who did it last time? And okay, I guess you get a vote this time. Oh, gosh, we were incorrect. Do we, you know, anyways, I just thought that was the cleanest way to do it. And that's how we've been practicing it, so. But again.
Makes sense. I mean, I have no issues with it. This is coming up now.
Right.
Alan, do you have anything to add on this subject? Frankly, my recollection of this is a little foggy. I'm not sure if I may not have been here at the time when we had the discussion, but I don't remember a decision on it myself.
My recommendation is that the commission decide.
That's safe.
Yes.
Well, my comment is on a case-by-case basis, especially determining that just before a vote on something else is a little bit messy.
Yeah.
I guess I would certainly advocate probably for a simpler solution.
So again, the last time, it wasn't something that we wanted to write into the bylaws, but it was what we discussed, and one of the commissioners had concern about, you know, well, how are you going to treat that every time? And I said, let's just keep it simple. As long as I'm chairing the meeting, it can simply be who's the first, who's the second. There's no brainer. You're not you know, you're not clouding who the voting member is that night if we don't have a full commission present without the alternates, so.
A point of clarification, I don't know if anyone can answer this. I mean, we had the conversation before, but why didn't we put it into the bylaws the first time around? Is there some sort of legal precedent preventing us from doing that? Kind of a question to staff.
So, David Stalheim, Long Range Planning Manager. So when we did the bylaws and we had two alternates appointed, we actually provided some options to the commission at that time. And as Chair Holland is recalling is exactly what the commission decided at the time, is that the actual bylaws right now allow for the discretion of the chair to make a decision as to who votes. And that's in the existing bylaws, and then he stated what his practice would be, and the commission at the time accepted that as a practice.
I don't have a problem with that. That makes.
So if we want to change that to have a different approach, I guess, instead of the chairman having their discretion on who votes for the evening, open to other suggestions, obviously. And for me, I thought that was the simplest practice. So.
And right now, we need both of you.
Until Craig gets here. Is he planning on?
I did hear back from him that he is.
Okay. Okay.
Sometimes that doesn't.
There's a motion and a second.
What's that? I think the motion was retracted.
Yeah, I retracted it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I retracted it.
So, yeah, without getting maybe for the next meeting, if we want to break the bylaws out and review them, and I don't have them present. Normally I have them, but I have a different book tonight. We can go through those and see if there's some amendments, or maybe the commission can look through it and see if there's a certain amendment we want to adopt into those and have a different practice. But I think for this evening, I'd like to just stay with the first alternate for voting purposes, and it might be both alternates tonight, because it looks like we're getting ready to
Go into a
get
public
started
hearing?
here pretty soon. So with that, was there any other reports from the commission? Any reports or anything? I did attend the Metro Everett Developers meeting, and I have some notes, and I'll pass that along to the commission. But some of the highlights of that meeting related to Metro Everett and the proposed design standards and all that was ensuring that there's a streamlined review of development, and to ensure that the staff is really knowledgeable about whatever is ultimately adopted, so they could be stewards of the code. And, you know, go out and, you know, when you have somebody come in and is proposing to do some type of development within Metro Everett, they can really steer them in the right direction, since this is all new to everybody. So, and obviously that's going to take a lot of work from staff in order to do that and to get up to speed and make sure you know it front to back. And again, it went along to just identify a clear process for the development review. There also was some mention about providing for some type of expedited review, if that would be possible, of staff. And also to, some suggestions were to go market the new design standards to try to get folks to invest into the community, to show the kind of different allowances there would be in the development within Metro Everett. Ensure that the standards are very clear and easy to navigate through. And I thought that the other couple items I thought were interesting was about this whole Jetsons thing of these drone lanes, and the drones are going to be flying you to the airport from here, and where exactly, you know, that they're thinking about all this stuff in Northern California. And so where would those lanes be, you know, with the Navy being here and dropping packages off, and it's coming sooner than later. So that was kind of interesting to hear people talk about that. Also, to start thinking about providing for autonomous vehicles within the right-of-way for drop-off and pickup, or allowing for some type of an incentive if you provide it on-site private property. And then the rest of it, I had to leave for the parking discussion, but the rest of it was related to raising the baseline for where the heights are now. I think there's different height areas, and then you can get, if you do certain incentives, you can raise those up. And so instead of capping what that incentive would be under a certain category, that you would be able to utilize, you know, more, instead of capping it at 20% or whatever it is in there, you'd be able to use a certain incentive, you know, more than just up to a 20% increase. But then to also start the baseline at a higher height and let the market dictate that. And that was also mentioned for the TOD corridors, because there was talk about minimum heights, potentially allowing the market to dictate that. And then the modulation thing came up, which I thought would, which, you know, they're basically saying you're taking economic loss by requiring, you know, the step-ins at every certain floors and the percentage you can get. And so there was some talk about, you know, structural design of buildings, and maybe that along the facade you would have that step back, but in order to structurally design that building, the sides and the back could be, you know, one level, but you would have that step back in the front. So that, anyways, those were what I took out of it. And I don't know, Commissioner Lark, if you had anything on the parking or whatever that came up, because I did have to leave on that. But those are the notes that I took on it.
Yeah, no, to echo what was mentioned, it was extremely interesting to have the conversation around drone deliveries and drone transit between the downtown core and the airport, and talking about, well, basically the Jetsons. So that was an interesting part of the conversation. But going back to mobility and parking, one of the things that was discussed was, again, making sure that we had mobility for, you know, TNCs, as well as, you know, looking at how we manage the parking in the downtown as part of our plan. Another thing that I thought was interesting was the conversation around how the incentives for height could be stacked or combined with each other, and that kind of plays into what Commissioner Holland was saying about the higher baseline height for buildings, because when some of the developers mentioned that to get all of the incentives to reach the highest maximum height, that it would be very hard to combine all the incentives. So I thought that was a very worthwhile note.
Yeah. Great. Did you have any commissioner reports, Jason?
No, my observations there were the same as both of you, and it was good to hear the people that actually are going to do it have some input. So.
Okay, great.
Great.
Tree committee, you did that last time?
No,
Okay.
no. Thanks for sharing, though.
Yeah. Staff comments?
Yes, only comment that we'll be meeting in 2 weeks on the 17th, excuse me, of April, and that the topic will be more changes in our code related to metro and off-street parking. Did you want to mention the open house?
So tied to the Metro Everett, so we've mentioned a couple things that we've been doing for review of the draft development codes and the plan. So we did a internal review of that and tested some development projects. And then as the chair mentioned, we had a developer meeting as well. And so come next week, we're going to have some new versions of the development codes and the plans that'll be posted online. So we'll let you know where they're at, and we're kind of tracking what the changes are, and so we'll give you a list of what the changes are, but a lot of them are in response to both our review and the input that we've gotten so far. So some of the things that were just mentioned, we'll have some alternative approaches to that are proposed. But that is all going to be then fed into a notice to every property owner within all of Metro Everett and everyone within the core residential area. So we're sending out 2,500 postcards sometime next week. And inviting them to a public meeting at the Weyerhaeuser Room on April 25th at 6 p.m. So this is an opportunity, again, to let people know that changes are proposed, ask some questions and get some input. And so we'll take that round of input again before we get yet another version then to present to you for public hearings. So before you get into public hearings, there's from the drafts that you've gotten, there will be 2 new versions, I'm sure, as a result of that and the input. So April 25th, Weyerhaeuser Room, Everett Station, 6 p.m. for the open house.
Thank you. Well, this is an opportunity for anyone in the audience that wants to address the Planning Commission on anything that's not on the agenda this evening. If so, please come forward. Thank you. We do have... Seeing none. We do have 2 items on the agenda tonight. The first one is a public hearing, so if you plan on testifying on either item 1 or item 2, please make sure to fill out the speaker sign-in sheet and provide that when we take the testimony. With that, I'll turn it over to Alan for the retail marijuana restrictions.
Thank you, Alan Giffen, Planning Director. And tonight has been advertised as a public hearing and a decision meeting for the regulations that we've been talking about and considering for possibly amending the number of permitted retail marijuana stores under the city's regulations. Currently, we allow 5, and the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board would allow up to 10 in Everett. The City Council, when they adopted the limit of 5 in June of 2016, asked that the matter be brought back and reviewed after 2 years, and so that's the process that we're in right now. We had a meeting on February 20th, and the Planning Commission had a number of questions, and so we have provided, I believe, all of the information that the Commission has requested. One of the requests was to get a packet of all of the minutes from the previous discussions when the Commission had initially adopted, or recommended, I should say, the enactment of regulations for retail marijuana uses, and then the last time around with the amendments. And so there's probably 20 or 40 pages worth of minutes that are in your packet from those previous discussions. You'd ask for a comparison of other cities' regulations with Everett's, and had some questions about the access to medical marijuana based on the last workshop on February 20th. You had asked also what the purpose of the separation requirements in the current code are for. You'd asked what a little bit more specificity about other sensitive land uses that we have recommended, staff has recommended adding to the list of land uses from which a retail store would have to be separated by a specific distance. You had asked about the legal authority to be more restrictive than the state Liquor and Cannabis Board. And then there was some request for what is the police department's conclusion on the data that was provided about calls for service. We have provided in your packet a lot of that information. I'll just summarize it here. In comparison with other cities, first I'll say that there are a lot of cities in the state of Washington, including some of our neighboring cities such as Mill Creek and Marysville, that do not allow for retail marijuana stores. Then one other store that one other city that we could find does not allow the same number of retail stores that the Liquor and Cannabis Board would, and that's the city of Renton. They allow 5, whereas the Liquor and Cannabis Board would allow for 6. We found 5 other cities with separation requirements between stores, and those range from 300 feet to up to 1,000 feet. Everett's is much more restrictive at 2,500 feet. And that there are a variety of cities that have a different approach to other sensitive land uses. In some cases, they treat any residential zone as a sensitive land use. In a few cities where they require 1,000-foot separation from any residential zone. There are other sensitive land uses in some codes, such as courthouses or jails or treatment facilities for drug and alcohol abusers, and so those are in addition to what the state already regulates as a sensitive land use. And we've summarized that in a little bit more detail in your packet. There were questions about access to medical marijuana in Everett, and most stores in Everett already have a medical endorsement, so medical products are available in the existing stores. But it's my understanding that there are fewer medical marijuana products available since the medical and the recreational systems were merged, and that in order to have a medical product, it must be approved by the Department of Health in order to be offered in one of the recreational stores. The purpose of the separation requirement in the existing regulations was that at the time we were going through the enactment of regulations for the first time, this was a new use, at least in terms of being a legal use within the community, and it was unknown what the impacts might be. The concern was to take a cautious approach and just see how we experienced any impacts as a result of crime or any other issues over time, and that was the primary concern. If there were a cluster of retail stores, would that make them an attractive target for criminal activity, or would there be criminal activity as a secondary impact from retail stores? It was not known, and based upon that concern, there was the separation requirement of 2,500 feet. We talked about different distances, and everything from 500 feet to 2,500 feet, and the commission at that time had recommended 2,500 feet. The other sensitive land uses that we are proposing in addition to those that are regulated by the state would be homeless shelters and homeless services, drug abuse rehabilitation centers and detox facilities, youth service organizations where you have recreational or social activities, social service facilities for homeless and those recovering from drug and alcohol abuse, and courthouses and correctional facilities. And our recommendation as staff is, which I'll get to in a moment, would be to add all of those as sensitive land uses in addition to those regulated by the state, which include schools and parks and a number of other things such as libraries and transit centers. Does the city have the authority to take a more restrictive approach toward regulating retail marijuana stores or recreational marijuana uses? Then the state, the Attorney General has issued the opinion that yes, cities and counties do have that authority. And many cities have chosen to prohibit retail marijuana either sales or marijuana, recreational marijuana processing and production. And so if you can prohibit them, then you can also take a more restrictive approach to the regulations. So that's been reviewed by our legal department. And the police department's conclusion on the data that they compiled about calls for service is that they really could not conclude that retail marijuana stores have really created an increase in the number of calls for service. They did not compare the data for calls for service in the vicinity of existing retail stores from a period prior to those stores being established and afterward. But in comparing the calls for service around existing retail stores and other land uses, they found things like convenience stores have a much higher incidence of calls for service than from retail marijuana stores. So the staff's recommendation, we are not making a recommendation on the number of stores. Right now it's 5, and you can go up to 10, or you can choose somewhere in between. We wanted that to be a policy recommendation from the Planning Commission to the City Council, and the Council can have their own policy discussion about the number of stores. But we do recommend that the separation between stores be reduced to 500 feet from the 2,500 feet, and that's based upon the police reading of the calls for service data. That also means that should you decide to allow for or recommend an increase in the number of stores, there will likely be more areas where they can be located by removing that 2,500-foot buffer, and I'll show you a map in just a moment to illustrate that. And the separation from residential uses, we recommend keeping the existing rule, and that rule is that retail stores are not allowed on lots that have a residential use, and retail stores are not allowed on lots contiguous to a lot that has a residential use. And these are the more sensitive land uses that we would recommend being added to the regulation. The homeless shelters and service facilities, youth service organizations, drug and alcohol detox or treatment facilities, social services for those recovering from drug and alcohol, and courthouses and correctional facilities. We do have a map that shows where those are located. Unfortunately, it doesn't show those, the smaller light brown or tan circles that you see on the map outside of the large concentric circles are some of those sensitive land uses. So you can see this is a map of the north end of Everett from, roughly about 47th Street to the north end. The large concentric circles are in the center of the large concentric circles are the existing retail stores in the north end of Everett. And the larger circle is the 2,500-foot radius that that's under the current regulation. Another retail marijuana store could not locate within the radius of one of those 2,500-foot arcs. The next circle in, next largest circle in is a 1,000-foot radius, and the smaller black line around the existing stores is a 500-foot radius. That's the staff's recommendation to reduce it to 500 feet. And this is a map of 3 stores in the south end, 2 of which are in the city limits, 1 of which is just outside the city limits across the street from the city of property within the city of Everett. And the regulation does apply to properties located within Everett. So a store currently within 2,500 feet, or if you were to recommend a change to that, could not locate within whatever that specified distance is should the change be made. You can see at the very south end there are 2 black dots, and those black dots represent addresses that have been approved by the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board for stores 6 through 10 in Everett. I think the, let's see, the 10th one, you can see a black dot right in the middle of Broadway in the center of that map. That's one of the 5 additional stores that Liquor and Cannabis Board has approved the licenses for, but the city has not. There are 4 that you see on the south half of the map, 2 of those down at the very south end of the city. That's in the vicinity of Airport Road and Evergreen Way. The 1 dot or star that is off to the most northerly of those black dots next to I-5 is actually located in a residential zone, and so it would not qualify even if you did increase the number to 10, and all of these stores were that apparently do have their licenses from the Liquor and Cannabis Board. That would not be a location where the city would approve a retail store. So that is just to explain the existing regulations and the research that we've done in response to the questions that you had. In your packet are the minutes of the earlier Planning Commission discussions, some correspondence that we have received since your last meeting, and a draft Planning Commission resolution supporting whatever decision you make. Again, the one that staff has not offered a recommendation on is the number of stores. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of staff before we open the public hearing?
I do have a couple questions, actually. I'm looking at the map here, and at least one of these current stores does appear to be within the 500 feet of potentially a proposed new sensitive location, if I'm looking at this correctly.
So which?
On the south end, it looks like the store up by Peck's on the northern one. Am I mistaken that
in the middle.
that
So
appears to be
this in this location?
I'm sorry,
right
the current to the left of that.
Okay.
That one up there. Am I seeing that correctly, that that is located within the circle that appears to be the radius of a vulnerable population buffer?
That's where the low-barrier housing is going in.
Yes, that is correct. But the store exists already. The use is proposed. It hasn't been built yet. And so the presence of a retail marijuana store would not preclude a sensitive use from locating closer to the retail store. But once a sensitive use is established, then it would preclude a future retail store from locating within the prescribed separation requirement.
Would that essentially then make the store a non-conforming use at that point, or?
It would become non-conforming with respect to that specific standard,
But
yes.
could continue until it ceased operations?
It can continue to operate in the location where it is. A new use coming in, a sensitive land use coming in, does not make that, does not force a relocation or closure of an existing store that was legally established.
And then I guess, if I could, sorry, I just have one other question. With regard to the proposal from staff about the additional sensitive uses, it seemed to me that the descriptors of those maybe are not as definite as they could be. Was that something that we would need to address at the Planning Commission level, or just, and who would arbitrate that? Would there need to be some further focus on those definitions, so that if there did become a dispute about it?
Well, what we have done, you can see some of these maps here, or dots on the map, are some of those sensitive land uses. You can see several of them throughout this map, and a lot more of them in the north end of Everett. As you can see, this is around, in and around the downtown, where we have a much greater concentration of social services, and also in the north end of Broadway, a number of those uses where there are for example, homeless services or youth service organizations or facilities for detox or rehabilitation of drug and alcohol abusers, the courthouse, the jail, correctional facilities, both in North Everett and in downtown. And so all of those are fairly well known. However, if there is a question about whether or not something meets that definition, that would have to be something that the city would review, and if somebody disagreed with the staff or planning director's determination, there is a process by which somebody can appeal that determination.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question to follow up on that? That area, the downtown area, is excluded anyways because it's mixed residential use, correct? So, I mean, so making additional special sensitive areas is a little redundant in terms of this particular jurisdiction because there's residential uses.
Not necessarily, no, not necessarily. The current regulation and what we're recommending be maintained is that a retail store may not be established on property containing residential use or contiguous to residential use. That means sharing a lot line with a lot upon which is located a residential use. So there are a lot of residential uses in the downtown that would make it very difficult in some areas of downtown for a retail store to be established. But the dots on the map there do not represent residential uses, unless it's a homeless shelter. But that is, those are other types of uses that would be additional sensitive uses beyond those that are.
Because what I'm trying to point out is that the downtown area is a mixed-use area, and it's going to have predominantly residential uses on a lot of the mixed-use area. So marijuana is not going to be able to locate in those areas because of the residential uses. Is that correct?
Well, no, there are a lot of lots where you could find a property
That has absolutely no
does not have a house or apartment on it or next door on either side. And that's really the test. We have to be contiguous.
So it's
not
not
across an
mixed-use,
alley.
multifamily. And I understand what you're saying. Because what you're talking about is also the single-family uses that are located in the.
Or a multifamily. It doesn't matter. If it's a residential use on the lot or on the abutting lot, a retail store could not be located there.
Not necessarily based on the zone. It's based on the use and the contiguous use. So you can't have a mixed-use building with a marijuana retail facility in it. And if there's a multifamily next door to an existing commercial building, you wouldn't be able to cite there.
Right, and that's the predominant uses in the downtown area. I'm not saying all, but predominant in terms of the.
So for example, if this building in this location, there is no residential use in this block or contiguous to this building, so in theory, this could be an eligible site in the B3 zone in the downtown.
But this is an institutional, and I'm thinking of the Metro Everett Plan, and the Metro Everett Plan calls for zones that are predominantly mixed use in nature and have residentials associated with other uses. So that's all I'm trying to point out here.
Yeah, the zoning wouldn't disqualify a retail use from being established. It's the presence of any residential use either on or on a lot contiguous to a lot where a retail store would be proposed.
Commissioner Lark.
I guess maybe I need a little more clarity as well, because one of my follow-up questions was, because a lot of what we're doing is we're streamlining the zoning for Metro Everett, and so how that impact where these sites are, marijuana retail shops are allowed to be located, because then all of a sudden we have a lot more sites that are primarily residential, and a lot more sites that are, just like Commissioner Beck said, are contiguous to residential sites. So I would love a little bit more clarity on what the Metro Everett plan and shifts on that plan will impact location and ability to build.
Okay, and that's not very significant change there. There, for the most part, the existing boundaries between what is considered residential zoning and what is considered commercial zoning, B3 for example, will become new zones, urban residential or urban mixed use zoning, and there are a few areas where the commercial zoning would expand about 2 or 3 blocks to the south of Pacific, just south of the courthouse, for example, would go from residential to urban mixed. And so they would become eligible to have a retail store if they, meet the separation requirements from other sensitive land uses or residential.
And do we see this model for Metro Everett's zoning standards and design, do we see that being rolled out to other parts of the city as well as we grow in density and size, or is that going to be exclusively Metro Everett?
Well, the zone that we're contemplating for Metro Everett would be primarily unique to Metro, but a lot of the same concepts could be applied. For example, additional mixed use. But, you know, in the areas that we're contemplating for future streamlining of our regulations, we don't anticipate wholesale changes from, say, residential zones to commercial zoning. Anything that's residential in most cases, and again, we haven't even started that process, but the thought process is that we would not be changing residential areas to become commercial and more land eligible for retail uses. We have more retail land than we probably need as a community, and that's why we encourage a lot of housing and mixed use within those commercial areas.
Roger that. And last question, just around non-conforming, to follow up on what Commissioner Yanisek was asking about. And so those sites that where a sensitive land use does move in and is close, they're non-conforming. But I remember our conversations around clinics in the downtown area around non-conforming and kind of the timeline for when a building can transition from, you know, being non-conforming and can't be used for that use again. And what were those timelines again for?
Well, first of all, if a store became non-conforming by virtue of a sensitive land use moving in or regulations changing as we're contemplating right now to where there's a land use that currently under our existing regulations is not considered a sensitive land use but would become a sensitive land use under this proposal, that retail store may become non-conforming, but that does not require them to do anything. They can continue in that location to operate as long as they don't discontinue that use for a period of more than 2 years under our non-conforming use regulations. If they did discontinue that use for 2 years or more, then another retail marijuana store would not be able to move into that location unless the sensitive land use also went away and removed that kind of buffer that is established.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to this residential zoning thing and stuff. I mean, if you look at the downtown and what the sensitive, because we weren't actually contemplating the change there. That's already in code, the residential to residential.
Right.
And if you just look at all the sensitive land uses within downtown, I mean, you're going to see that it goes out to the edges anyway, because you have all the different services in there. So I don't know that it necessarily makes a, you know, any change to what currently is allowed, you know, in that. So, Alan, I did have a couple questions for you. I know it's always difficult, but how exactly do you intend to track those sensitive land uses? I know you can get certain information, but I'm just thinking if somebody trying to locate and going in and securing a license from the state. So, for instance, if for whatever reason they've already secured one and the number of stores goes up and they go to try to secure another one, and by the time they go through all that process, a sensitive land use moves in, according to Everett. I mean, how many times they got to jump through that hoop before they can find that exact location? I just want to figure out how we're going to track those to be able to let the customer know that, hey, this is an area you can go to currently. Go ahead and go get your license from the state. I mean, is there a process to be able to allow to do that?
Well, we attempt to map all of the sensitive land uses, and we do that with information we get from business licenses, from the assessor's record, from a number of different data sources. We don't necessarily know every use in every building, and so part of our review when a license comes in to the city would be to do a review of land uses in the area. And if it's in our review we discover there is a sensitive land use, then we would not be able to approve the business license for a retail store in that location.
So does the city of Everett issue their own business license, or is it just state licenses?
The city issues its own business license.
So if I were a retail store owner and I come in and I applied for a business license with the city of Everett, and it was determined that I was not within a sensitive land use tract, but I have not secured my state license yet, would that be something that would put that license on hold until you got your state licensing, just in case a sensitive land use moves in and I haven't invested a bunch of money in leases and other things like that.
Yeah, we would require the state license before we would issue the city business license.
I did see an email in here that this is the reason I brought that up, is about, you know, we have these ones mapped that have been approved by the state, and so people could go in and open some kind of a small
Arcade.
special, arcade or something like that, that would preclude them from locating those locations, just to try to circumvent, I guess, what we're trying to do as a city, so,
Competition.
yeah.
That's a possibility.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it just depends which one gets established first.
Okay. And one thing I wasn't clear about, hopefully you can help me out, is the 500-foot for both sensitive land use and then also separation from stores? Is that what's proposed?
That's the staff's recommendation, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff?
Ellen, the logic, we went from 2,500 to 500, that's a lot. What was the staff's logic behind that?
Twofold. One is that very few cities in the entire state have any separation requirement between stores. The largest that we found in other jurisdictions was 1,000 feet. There are other jurisdictions that went down to, that have a separation requirement that go down to like 300 feet or 500 feet. Also, the police data was inconclusive as to really a causational effect of retail stores and calls for service, and so that was the main concern when we established the 2,500-foot separation requirement. Was any potential impacts from crime. That hasn't really manifested itself according to the police data, and so we are still recommending a separation requirement, but reducing that to 500 feet.
Thank you.
If
If I could ask one more question, this list of proposed additional sensitive uses, how was that list created? Was that in consultation with anybody? I know previously at our last meeting there was some discussion that the mayor's office maybe had some
Right, we did
ideas.
have a discussion with the mayor and others that are frankly dealing with the opioid crisis, the homelessness crisis that we have, and the recommendation there is that we really don't want to encourage retail stores to be located in close proximity to those who are struggling with addiction or those who are vulnerable for you know, a variety of reasons that they may be homeless, but you know, that's certainly one of them is addiction.
If I can just, part of me is just a little concerned that we're kind of like baking in a lot of stigma around homelessness into this code. I'm just assuming that they're homeless for the exclusive reason that they have made poor choices and have chosen to abuse drugs, whereas like the data does not show that. So
And that's not what we're saying.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's our intent here, but I'm concerned that, you know, this, when it can be read into the code that this is how we're approaching it. Has there been any other data around this? Has there been any other research around other cities to kind of give us a little more context for the siting of homeless shelters and that inclusion of homeless shelters into these lists of sensitives or sensitive land use areas, or are we just kind of?
No, that's in other communities' regulations as well. I don't remember which cities, but there are several cities that do include that as a sensitive land use from which they require a separation.
Isn't a homeless shelter considered a residential use? Wouldn't that be considered residential?
Yes, which means you can't have a retail store contiguous, but this would require a 500-foot separation requirement.
Mr. Zielinski?
Just one clarification on the map, Alan. I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear you say it. The sensitive use circles on that map, those are not just the existing ones, but the proposed new uses as well?
It does include the supportive housing project on Berkshire. Yes, and that and
But I mean, all of the ones on your list
yes.
of proposed additions to the list of sensitive uses.
Yeah, the ones that we are aware of.
Are reflected on this map.
Correct.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Dunn?
So as I look at the map with the 500-foot sensitive use areas, there's 4 of 5 businesses that are violating that, this new restriction. So the only one would be, I think that's Bud's Garage over on Hewitt. So you mentioned that there's only 1, but it looks like there's actually 4 or 5 of them would be in violation. And then I know that other jurisdictions include separation and sensitive use areas for courthouses and drug and rehab, but the one that's missing is youth. So your staff has suggested including youth as a sensitive use area, but based on the long-term health study, there has not been an increase in cannabis by youth. So what is the scientific or background research that was used to add youth into a sensitive use area?
It wasn't based on any scientific research. It was a recommendation from administration that we would not allow for the siting of recreational retail stores in close proximity to, for example, a Boys and Girls Club or some other facility of that nature.
Okay, and then the latest studies have also shown that when you have legal cannabis, there's a decrease in opioid use and opioid overdoses. So why are we including drug and rehab facilities as a sensitive use area?
We're including those as sensitive uses because the people undergoing treatment still have challenges, and so we did not want to create just I'm not sure what the right term is, but just have that those two uses so close to one another. It's just something that, again, was recommended from administration.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we open up the public hearing? Okay, I do have several people that have signed up to address the Planning Commission today. If you can kindly keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, and then if you haven't filled one of these out, please make sure you do so and get it up to me, and we'll hear from you. So the first one is Philip Dottie. And please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, Philip Dottie. For the record, 1608 East Republican in Seattle. I represent the 5 stores that have complied with the moratorium for the last 2 years. And to put that in perspective, there were communities that did do some moratoriums and bans, like unincorporated Pierce County, Auburn, et cetera, and they had people get licenses and get open and go fight them in court, and it cost them hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. My clients haven't done that. They've been cooperative. We hope you'll recommend to City Council allowing the second round of 5 stores to open. There's a number of reasons. Obviously, my clients have been spending money for 2 years on property they can't use and businesses they can't open, and they'd like to recoup some of their investment back. It would also go a long way towards getting Everett in line with the statewide average of 1 store per 12,000 residents. Right now, you're at 1 store per about 22,000 residents, and that's one of the lowest distributions in the state. This would get you to 1 per 11,000, and I apologize for gasping. Pollen is just deadly today, just deadly. And that's how you drive the illicit market off. In Capitol Hill, where I live, when the first store opened, there was still what we used to call commercial pot dealers around. I knew who they were in the neighborhood, and they were still doing it. When the second store opened, boom, they were out of business. Done. And I talked to one of them about it the other day, who does different things with his life now. Allowing the second round of 5 stores would also be a matter of fairness. These guys have played by the rules every step of the way with the state and the city, and there should be some kind of path forward reward for that. Excuse me. We appreciate staff's hard work on this. This has been a lot of work, and I appreciate the recommendation on having the dispersion rule down at 500 feet, which is a lot more manageable. We've got some concerns about adding additional buffers, just because it takes away real estate. We're certainly sensitive to what the mayor's trying to go after here. We get that. The reason you didn't see cities like Seattle restrict around homeless shelters was because there's always like a park or something right by it that was already doing that sort of thing. I would just say if you're going to recommend to council adding additional buffers, it would be great if they could also get a recommendation to really define tightly what they mean. For instance, correctional center, does that mean the jail right over there? Or does it mean the parole office in South Everett? I don't know. Like I said, we do understand needing to protect vulnerable populations. We just ask you to be as judicious as possible. Now, you did notice in the packet that there's one city named Renton that has less than the number of stores the liquor board allocated. And that was because in November 2015, I got a panicked phone call from their city council president, who's a friend of mine, longtime friend of mine, going, the liquor board isn't putting any limits on anything. My mayor's freaking out. What do we do? And I said, put a limit on the number of business licenses the city will issue. And he goes, what number should I choose? And I go, I don't know. How's 5 sound, Ed? And that's what they went and did the next day. They did that a month before the liquor board announced what the allocations would look like in the second round. Because as you all might remember, they were telling people there were going to be no limits at one point. So that was why the Renton situation happened that way. And just the last point I wanted to make, the liquor board did appeal the Kittitas court ruling, so it's going to be 12 to 18 months before we get any kind of answer and clarity on what might come from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Preston Peck? And again, please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Preston Peck. It's 15901 Southeast 178th Street, Renton. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all the commissioners. As I said, my name is Preston Peck. I'm the executive director of a registered nonprofit called Washington Sun Growers Industry Association. We represent outdoor growers across the state of Washington that use regenerative agricultural practices. These are the kind of places that you think of when you think of a typical farm. You think of outdoors, you think of tractors, you think of hands in the dirt, those kind of folks. Our focus is on sustainability in the cannabis industry, which I think that this is a pertinent kind of topic. Our mission is to support sun-grown cannabis through encouraging environmental and economically sustainable practices through advocacy, education, and research. I'm here to support these stores that would like to open for a couple different reasons. Number one being that more retail stores are going to offer more opportunities for consumers or patients to purchase sustainably grown cannabis from our members or other sun growers. Not every sun grower in the state is a member of our organization, although we hope to change that in the future. But we would still like to see the opportunity for them to purchase this kind of cannabis. Also, an increase like this would also increase exposure or access for our members and increase options or access to those options for consumers or patients so that they can choose sustainably grown cannabis that is natural, chemical-free, and good for you. I would also like to say that we are focused on this issue so that we can enter markets here as well, but we want to do so in the right way and want to support this. And it's from our conversations with these different owners and our background on the information, they're trying to do it in the right way and have been for quite some time. Wanted to thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to speak in front of you tonight, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. My contact information is with the clerk.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Kent Peverly?
Kent Peverly, 312 Pex Drive. A copy of my comments that I had written up previously should be before you, but I'm going to summarize somewhat. I'm going to take a little different tact here and recall why the second round even came about. And as I recall, it was because of the legislature's action to incorporate medical marijuana into the system for recreational, and therefore the LCB decided we needed to double the number of stores or increase the number of stores, whatever jurisdiction you're talking about, to accommodate this influx of customer base we were going to have. And apparently, part of the concern was that there weren't going to be enough retail stores that would get their medical endorsement. I believe the data shows that that has happened. There are plenty of stores out there that have their medical endorsements. Second off, there was concern about the issuance of whether people would be interested in actually participating in this. During the hearings, as I recall, there were a number of people who, medical users, who were concerned that the availability of the right products or what they needed would not be available under the proposed system. And I believe Alan has already mentioned that there does seem to be a problem there in the number of available products and the potencies and the strengths and the recommended dosages and in the delivery system that these people are looking for. Now, obviously, there's probably a whole lot of people that were previously in the medical users who are not participating in the system. And the system as it stands right now, and this is as of data that I received today, a number of registered medical cards that have been issued by stores as of last November 30th stands at 2,874 just for the county of Snohomish. Obviously a much greater number than what we would have here within the city of Everett. So it seems to me that there's the number of people who were expected to be using this system just don't exist. And therefore, that's not a good reason just to introduce 5 more stores. I think that that we need to stay with the original mandate and I'd like to also recommend keeping the 2,500-foot exclusion zone around the stores. I don't like the clustering we see, especially down Highway 99. I think that is a bad practice. I think between the city limits of Everett and Linwood, I have counted 12 that are visible. I don't know how many. I haven't checked the list to see if there's more, a block or two off the main drag. And I would also encourage you to impose these additional buffers for the sensitive uses that you're considering. Thank you.
Thank you. Donald Jacks.
Good evening. Thank you, Commissioners, for this opportunity. My name is Donald Jakes. My address is 15614 30th Avenue Southeast, Mill Creek, Washington. The reason I'm here today is because I'm the Chief Operating Officer for an Everett-based company called Electric Mirror. And we've, at our peak, we've hired 400 people from the local community. And as I've mentioned before the City Council, we don't believe that greater availability of marijuana is going to help some of our employees. We've seen washouts, and we've had some people fail drug testing after some accidents occurred, and we think more of this is not good. But that's not the reason I'm here today. I was hoping to speak with you today, or wish to speak with you about economic development. Now, I'm not the authority on strategic development for cities and towns, but I do know a little bit about business. And as we see companies like in the South, we've got Amazon just going south, and they're not suggesting everyone needs an Amazon, but they're just pushing south, and they're overtaking some business. They're just taking up real estate and bringing a lot of great jobs and success to folks. I'm presuming as you see that, you also want to spur on some great growth here in the Everett community. And I expect that just as others before you have tried to do, that you wish to see Everett blossom into this gem of the Northwest and see vibrant businesses with a vibrant community and great populations in residential areas and whatnot, all living together in unity and just growing and having a great time. If that is a goal for Everett, I think there are a few things that are essential. One of them is land for business and community, and we do have it. We just need to make sure we plan it appropriately, and I appreciate what you folks are doing to that end. We need a vibrant port and rail for international trade, and we've got that in spades. We're really set up well for businesses to succeed here, specifically internationally. Arts and culture, and if you look around, we do have arts and culture, but it's limited only by the amount of commerce that we do all around the city here, and I think that can be made greater, and it can attract more businesses. We need to attract and sustain excellent companies. the number of which right now is woefully deficient. We've got some great companies that are around here, but it's not those notable bigger names that attract a lot of great people in, a lot of good commerce, a lot of good tax revenue that allows us to improve communities and provide great things for people. A talented and motivated workforce, and we do have a talented workforce, but it is limited. As someone who hires a lot of people, we try to pull from the Everett marketplace, but we have to go a lot farther. And we have some issues with some of the employees that we've had. I believe it is the job and your mission, as you might know better than I, of the City Council and the Planning Commission, to foster growth and development. And I just ask, is it the best use of the council's time to cultivate marijuana dispensaries? I don't think so. If economic development is truly a primary goal, and I understand the mayor, it is a very big goal for her, I've had a conversation. If that makes sense and that's where we're going, is this the best thing for us to be doing? How will you attract the new notable businesses into Everett that will make this a vibrant community and be the fuel to grow it where it needs to grow? Is putting more marijuana stores in going to do that? I don't think so. How will you cultivate the talented and self-actualized, motivated people? Is putting more marijuana stores in that defines the community the way to get that done? I honestly don't think so. Is several hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax revenue worth putting all of that economic development and that community development at risk? I don't think so. So I just ask, please be very serious about what you want this city to become and where you want to go, and equally serious about what you want to avoid as you plan this city out into the future. If you don't do that, I think that we'll continue to see more of the same of what we've done. And with Seattle and Bellevue just burgeoning, businesses are looking for somewhere else to go. And I know that they're looking south, and I see people going even north of here. Everett is a phenomenal city with some great assets and great capability. And I think if we think about it correctly and we look at what we're allowing into the community and how we're planning it, I think if you look at it, there's a lot we can do. Sorry to be so scattered with that, but I think putting marijuana stores in and defining Everett by that is not going to promote what you would like to see happen in the future. I think it's a great city, and I think it can be greater. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Richard E.K.?
Hi, I'm Richard Eck, and I live at 13831 51st Drive, Southeast in Everett, 98208. I want to add my voice to sustain some of the resolutions that the gentlemen have made today. That is to, I take it that they want to consider keeping the number of retail stores to 5. I also have a question. I don't know if anybody wants to take the answer, but why when we look at sensitive land uses, we understand the Boys and Girls Club. We understand, I think the word was campfire in there, where children come and teenagers come for social activities, sports activities, and so forth. I don't know why churches were not included. And this 500-foot barrier is a joke. You've got one store located 80 feet from a sensitive land use area. It has hundreds of kids, from Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, high school kids, 6 days a week in the building. 80 feet is 5 lanes of traffic and about 10-foot right-of-ways for the sidewalks and the greenbelt. So 500 feet is a joke. Oh, you know which one I'm talking about. But there's children in that place. There's families in that place. The families drive their children to the school, and there's not only see the store coming and going, but they also see a coffee stand that has a big sign on the side advertising for hot ladies. I hope you don't allow that to happen to any other church in our community. Think about it. Nobody's doing any research to find out what goes on in these buildings, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of use in that building and in many others. Don't let any new stores come within 1,000 feet of those places. I think that that's enough. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Michelle, is that right?
Hello, and thank you very much for letting us talk tonight. I just want to talk more in the, not sophisticated, but in the vein of being a mom and a grandmom and a business owner. And so far, it's been fun those years because you're always motivating, stimulating, correcting, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're in a whole different age than when my kids were little or when I was little. You know, you're strongly protected. More so now we got the videos, we got the cars, we got stimulus going everywhere for the children. And so I'm here on behalf of the children. As a business owner, we have approximately 400 people that work for us. It's a family business. And so basically, we've got all kinds of big equipment in this business. And these people that come to work for us are younger, and I feel like I'm a mom to them, and we have the dads, and we try to train up the employees and the staff, the leaders, the supervisors, to be interested in them as people and as extended family from the family that they are, or they're from. Most of the families are broken. You know, you hear that when they come in. They tell you stories of the divorce and the this and the that in their homes. So we are the family. Okay, so when I hear stories about them, I get excited. We have married them. We have buried some of them. And the issues in their family are very strong to us. And we can recommend certain things, and we can help in certain areas. We don't solve everything. But one of the big issues that hit me more recently was a young man who'd been with us for some time, and we liked him. Good guy. And he's on a forklift one day, and he takes this big crate, and he smashes it right into the wall. And I'm thinking, what on earth happened? It turns out, you know, better do a test. He's on marijuana. It stays in your body for 30 hours or 24 hours or something. I don't know all the details. I said, why on earth are you on marijuana? It turns out from HR, oh, more than just he. There's others. Now, we have to be responsible for people living and dying in our company. We're responsible. First, we have product going all over the world. We got a beautiful award from Rick Larson a couple of years ago as one of the outstanding companies in the area for sending product all over the nation and beyond the nation to, I think, 90-some countries in the world. So now then, as a mom and a grandmom and a wife, and you're looking over this whole situation, you say, well, what's wrong? You know, how can I change this? One person, how can I change this? I can deal with their emotions, but when they see, and I don't have an argument for them, they can go by this, hey, Faith, this is legal now. It's okay, Faith, everything's like, no, I argue against that. I think if they have emotional problems with their families or they're distraught or something, I've got better answers. It's real simple. It's called LOVE. So I just want to recommend against all this and say, let's get the families back together. Let's bring in more people that can give them, you know, they're talking about the why and so on. Yes, yes, yes. But these kids can go across the way and just pick up some marijuana with their little buddies and so on. Please, here's what I feel like God is telling me to share with you. As adults and as people that are responsible for making laws, and we vote for them, I would say to you what God said to me a long time ago, to wake up, because definitely there has been marijuana in our family, an extended family. I'm talking about my adult relatives and some of the great-grandchildren now. But this is what the Lord spoke so clearly to me. Better a millstone be around your neck if you be cast into the sea if you lead one of these little ones astray. That hit me really cold, like, wake up, Faith. And I would say to you, please consider a different approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. James Michelle?
Hey, hello. I'm Dr. Jim Michelle. I'm also with the Electric Mirror. I also have a degree in dentistry, which I practiced for many years. I have recently taken 2 courses on street drugs, and these are from fairly liberal people at the UW. And it comes down to what they feel is marijuana is an entry-level drug to move on to bigger and better things. And I'm getting this from college professors. They seem to think there's very little medical advantage to taking marijuana. And basically, I just don't understand why we would, as a community, as responsible people, encourage this. It's just amazing the number of people that are on marijuana, and a lot of them are really not in a position anymore to do much, and you see them every day walking around the street and a few other places. And like Faith was talking about, we have people get in trouble on machinery because they're loaded. Now, what I don't understand is why Boeing would even put up with this. If I were them, I'd pack up and go to North Carolina and get out of Dodge. Thank you.
Thank you. Trey Sewell.
My name's Trey Sewell. I live at 1131 115th Street, Everett, Washington, 98204. I'm not a business owner, but I am a disabled vet, and I came back home in April of 15, got my medical card a month later, and CBD is the entire reason I'm able to hold a job. I jumped out of planes. I had a bad jump in 2012 where I was coming in backwards and I didn't tuck my head, and when I hit the ground, it knocked me out. My chute drugged me about 300 meters. Since then, my back's been twisting to accommodate my neck injury. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not a not productive member of society. I'd like to be able to hold a job, and part of that is being able to access the stuff that helps me. When the medical market shut down and all of those medical stores left, so did the products that they carried. And we're only starting to see some of those come back now. One shop's only able to carry so many products, and having more shops open, allow more shops the ability to stock more products that I can choose between until I can find what allows me to carry on a normal life. I don't, as a veteran, appreciate the stigma maybe some people have in this community for the things that allow me to lead a productive and daily life like anybody else does. And I would like there to be more options for people like me. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Any questions from the commission?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, is it Bigelow?
It is.
Okay.
Good. My name is Mark Bigelow. I live at 14429 53rd Avenue Southeast in Everett. So I want to ask that you keep the number at 5 and that you add churches to the sensitive land use group for the same reason that Richard outlined as well. And the reasons are, I have 3 reasons. One, I appreciate Commissioner Dunn's appeal to scientific evidence. The evidence is pretty clear that marijuana helps with the opioid epidemic, and that's a horrible epidemic. I work in healthcare, and I understand that that is something we need to fight. And that could be a way medical marijuana usage could help with that. But if I understand, Alan, your presentation, that has been curtailed a bit by the introduction of recreational marijuana. If I understood right, that it's been harder to get medical marijuana now with the recreational usage. And also, the scientific evidence is pretty clear that it's incredibly harmful to developing adolescent brains, marijuana usage is. And just like alcohol usage is pretty rampant among teenagers, marijuana usage, if it's not now, it will be. Adults will buy it for children. Putting it next to schools and other places where kids are, including churches, will only give them the opportunity to do this. And again, the literature is very clear that it's harmful to children's brains. And that leads me to my second point, that effectively, well, it's unethical to fund a government on the back of a harmful and an addictive substance. So the only way now that our children, if it's funding education, can be educated is if people smoke marijuana and if people take marijuana. And in fact, the more kids that do that, the more they'll get educated. It's a perverse incentive, and it's something that we should not support. We definitely don't want to be the city that's funded based on only purely alcohol and marijuana usage, and the more stores we allow, the more that will happen. I guess the third thing I have is really a question of why. There's no, I pass these stores all the time, there's no lines out the door. There's no shortage of supplies. People can get what they need at the 5 stores they have now. So there's really no purpose other than I hear a lot of people from other cities coming in saying they want us to have stores. And I understand that other cities that are surrounding us that don't have stores want to come here and buy marijuana. So effectively now, by moving out the illegal drug dealers, Everett's become the drug dealer. We now support the drug habits of the people surrounding the city. And by adding to the number of stores, that problem will only continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Heidi Bigelow?
My name is Heidi Bigelow, and I am the wife of Mark Bigelow, and we live at 14429 53rd Avenue Southeast, Everett. And I am here because I am the only mother, apparently, who's actually currently raising children in Everett here tonight. We have 5 children that we are raising here. We have lived here for 15 years. We've owned a home in Everett for 15 years. And we care about this community, and we care about the people here, the very, very good people here. And we don't want to be surrounded by marijuana. And we don't want to have money made by it used to educate our children. I grew up in Nevada. I was surrounded by legalized prostitution and gambling. And I am sad to say that that money was used to educate me. And I regret that. I'm also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I would request that you please add churches to the list of sensitive land use. We do have our children and our youth, our Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, who are there, and we want to protect them. I want to protect my children. Please protect my children. Please don't recommend more stores. We would love to live here another 15 years with our children in Everett. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't have anybody else signed up to speak to the commission tonight. Sir, please come forward and state your name and record for the, or name and address for the record, and also please make sure you fill one of these out and get it to Kathy.
I did fill out the sheet.
Okay, I don't have it.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, for the record, my name is Sean O'Sullivan. I live at 11825 28th Street Southeast, Lake Stevens, Washington, 98258. I here representing Cushman, which is a marijuana store, and asking you to consider lifting the ban and allowing 5 more shops at least to come into Everett. Reason why. I've been working this marijuana issue since 2015. I worked on 5052. The idea was because of the marijuana laws being passed, this is by the will of the people, by the way. The only reason we're having this conversation, the people of the state of Washington voted to legalize both medical marijuana and then recreational marijuana. The state had to make the task of regulating marijuana, and that's what 5052 was all about, and it was a real dogfight. I represented at the time medical marijuana patients who we were trying to get the best deal for them, particularly with the excise tax. And that brings up the idea of revenue. We tried to get a bill passed to reduce the excise tax from 37% down to 25%. The budget writers in the state said, no, we need the revenue. And it became very apparent to me that the whole issue surrounding the new budding marijuana industry was revenue. And I understand the idea of the concerns with the church people and the local neighbors, but we're a nation that has been very prominent in telling the world that we're not, the legislators in that role don't legislate morality. People, personal morality is up to them. And so that said, Everett's always been kind of progressive on leading that charge. And as far as Everett's concerned, I grew up around here. If you walked down Hewitt in the 60s or the 70s, it was like a Wild West town. It was unsafe. And that was a big argument against the Navy. If we bring the Navy in, it's going to cause a big red light district and it's going to cause all this crime. Instead, we got a nice skating rink and pizza parlors up and down Hewitt. It's kind of nice. I feel safe walking up and down Hewitt now. My belief, if the marijuana industry is work in progress, they're still working on these bills and how marijuana is going to effectively help the state and the local communities with their revenue streams. And this Cushman shop that I work for, if you go in there, it looks like a jewelry store. There are security cameras. There are thick doors. They really go the full mile to make that place safe and convenient for people to get their marijuana product. You know, it's like a liquor store. You know, it's a law, and we would have liked to have seen it done differently. They combined the marijuana with the Liquor Control Board. We would have liked to have had a separate agency with doctors and medical people, particularly. Coming up with the right dosages. Medical marijuana is a medicine. People use that for anything from rheumatoid arthritis to cancer, and people need that product. We're growing, and we're growing fast in this county. I moved out to East County to get away from civilization, and they're putting in a Costco within walking distance of my house right now. It's just growing. And so the need and the supply is going to grow too. And I think it would be advantageous for Everett to regulate this industry, add an extra 5-shot, make sure that people have the means to get their marijuana. I don't use marijuana, I never have. I don't even smoke, I don't even drink. But it is the law and it's by the will of the people. So I wish when you make these decisions that you consider that and then work the process to where you can create the proper zones. Keep them. You don't have to have them by churches or schools or kindergartens. You know, we've heard all the horror stories. Since 5052, every one of those green signs, those green crosses that you drive up, you'd see one about every corner. They're all gone. And that was the purpose of 5052. We're under a regulated program. Our governor, our attorney general's already told the Trump administration that it's the will of the people, it's the law of our state. Don't interfere with that. So it's, you're at the, I've always depended on Everett politicians for making great decisions, and I'm convinced that you will in this case. Everett has produced some of the greatest legislators in the history of the state and the republic. And because this is a democracy and because this is the will of the people, I know you'll act correctly. But as far as my employer and me goes, we'd like to see that ban lifted because the growth is coming and the laws is work in progress. So you're going to see a lot more changes, I'll guarantee it, in the next few legislative sessions because there's still a lot of work to be done on the marijuana issue, particularly with the Department of Health, I think. Because they're now coming up with the right dosages for the right illness. You know, they're kind of behind the 8 ball on that, but they're catching up to speed on the medical side of it. So, and we need more medical marijuana endorsements. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
By the way, I got this, I printed this out for, it's an estimate of revenue stream that you'll get from excise taxes.
We'll make a copy for the commission.
Yeah, I got one for everyone else. So.
I have a quick question. Because you likely know. So in 2015, the legislature actually reduced the restrictions, allowed for local jurisdictions to have more control and flexibility over their buffer setbacks. My understanding is since that time, the trend has actually been to reduce, which is what we're doing here as a city as well, the buffer setbacks. The city of Redmond has reduced, city of Seattle has reduced, city of Olympia has reduced. Are you familiar with other jurisdictions that have actually reduced their buffer setbacks and for what reasons they're reducing?
Can you ask that?
Thank you. Just please just state your name and
that seems to
address
be
for
the
record.
overwhelming trend.
Let me just reintroduce myself.
At.
Hi, it's Philip Doughty again, and for the record, 1608 East Republican in Seattle. The bill you're referring to there is Senate Bill 2136 from 2015. It was going through the same time as 5052, and what we call the 1,000-foot rule that we started with in 502, 1,000 feet from everything that a kid could go to. was actually Allison Holcomb, who was the primary author of 502, overriding, that's not the right term, taking the federal rule of the 1,000-foot rule and exploding it. The 1,000-foot rule...
From the Controlled Substance Act, correct?
It's not in the Controlled Substance Act, actually. It's a sentencing enhancer. So it was this 1,000-foot rule came in the 1980s to address the crack epidemic. And what it says is you got to be, if you're selling a controlled substance within 1,000 feet of a school or a playground, or within 100 feet of a community center or a recreation center, then you get an extra 3 years on your sentence. But there was always that ability for non-school and non-playground stuff to come down to 100 feet. And that's what 2136 did. It gave local jurisdictions the ability to take the non-school, non-playground buffers down to as low as 100 feet because you're still in conformity with federal rules at that point. And a lot of communities found that they were having trouble locating stores because of like a transit center or something like that. So I think in Olympia's case, they went down to 500 feet so that they could get something, you know, a couple of blocks away from a transit center that where kids weren't playing and running around anyway. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
And they were doing this for the purpose of, they were trying to locate retail outlets, correct?
It was mostly to address, yeah, the spread of retail stores, to get a better spread in particularly in larger communities, and to get the buffers in some level of conformity with what the feds cared about.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
I didn't have anybody else signed up. Is there anyone else that wants to address? Okay, I'm seeing one. Yeah, just give it to Kathy there. Thank you. And just please just state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Joshua Shade. Address is 5626 134th Place Southeast, and I'm a recreational marijuana retailer just outside the city limits of Everett. I want to talk to you guys about the medical marijuana endorsement. Because I came from medical marijuana, I ran a medical marijuana store several years before recreational was around. The medical marijuana endorsement is literally just a stamp you get from the Liquor and Cannabis Board. It says, yes, you have this endorsement. Medical marijuana and recreational marijuana are the exact same things. It's like saying Oxycontin is medical, or you can take Oxycontin to get high. If you need medical marijuana to help you, CBDs are definitely medical marijuana, then that's what you're going to get. My store is just outside the city limits of Everett. I don't mind more stores. My niece actually has a store here that she's trying to open. I have patients that come to my store because Everett doesn't sell the products they need for their medical marijuana. Now, is that because there's not enough demand? I don't know, but that does happen. And I've heard people here saying that there's no use for marijuana, there's no medical use for marijuana. Harvard, about 2 weeks ago, came out with a study saying that marijuana shrinks cancer. It's Harvard. You know, it's not some rinky-dink place. You know, it's a pretty big, well-known university. I personally employ 3 vets. 3 vets that came, they were just sitting at home for months and months and months, couldn't get out, drinking. I went over there and I smoked a bowl with them. I said, hey, bud, you need to, come out. 2 years later, they've been working for me for a year and a half. Yes, they still have problems, but the marijuana got them out. And these people served our country. And marijuana is what helped them get out of their shell that every bump and pop didn't freak them out. So I don't see why having 5 more stores would hurt your city. I don't see anybody saying there's enough teriyaki places, we don't need more teriyaki. You know, why do we need another teriyaki store? There's plenty. You can go to the one down there. What's the difference between having 5 or 10? There's no other industry that's regulated like this. And I think it's unfair for people to regulate that. It just doesn't make sense to me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to address the Planning Commission on this item? Seeing none, do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Call for the vote.
Commissioner Lark,
Yes.
Commissioner Yanusak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra? Yes. Commissioner Zelinski?
Yes.
Commissioner Tisdale?
Yes.
Commissioner Beck?
Yes.
Chair Holland?
Yes. So we have a resolution before us, I believe, that is asking for a recommendation on the number of stores to be allowed, as well as reduction in the buffer from 2,500 to 500 feet, and the addition of some new sensitive land uses, I believe are the three amendments that staff is looking for a recommendation on. So any discussion on that resolution?
Sorry,
I can find it.
I just want to add something because Commissioner Dunn mentioned it, and I want to get it on the record. Because part of the reason why the city of Everett decided to have the 2,500-foot buffers is because we wanted to take a conservative approach. So I want to read this report, which was a cost-benefit evaluation of marijuana. According to Washington State Institute for Public Policy, September 2017, I-502 evaluation and benefit cost analysis, the report states, we found no evidence that the amount of legal cannabis sales affect youth substance use or attitudes about cannabis or drug-related criminal convictions. And that's from the state. And they're actually looking at this hard and have a committee for it. So I understand that we have all these concerns about criminality and increased drug abuse and things of that nature associated with this particular substance, but the evidence is showing that the track record is unfounded. So I think it's important to get that on the record for council when they're making a decision on this issue, because my recommendation is that we do not increase sensitive land uses. I think we already have a number of sensitive land uses, and that just creates more regulation for areas that are probably regulated and prevented out of other restrictions that are associated with this code. So I just wanted to get that on the record, that that is the actual evaluation and cost-benefit analysis coming from the state.
I guess I want to make a comment. I guess I don't view this issue here as being a proxy for an argument about should we legalize marijuana recreationally or not. That ship sailed a long time ago. We had a public vote. The people spoke. I agree with that sentiment. So I do hear that creeping into the argument. I don't consider that at all being the issue. To me, the issue is really not even a question of why. It's a question of, we have these, Everett's an outlier, essentially, from what I can see here with regard to the cautious approach, which I understand. I reviewed all the minutes. I know there's a lot of thought went into that. But from my view, I think that the evidence has accumulated that caution, any concerns about that merited caution have, in my view, should have dissipated. I guess I have some concerns about the additional sensitive uses proposed here. One, as a lawyer, I feel like it's kind of a gift to lawyers. It's not defined well enough. It's leaves a lot to be potentially debated about. And I don't know, I feel like they're based more on fear and other issues than any sort of science, or there's no real basis that I've seen for those. A lot of assumptions. And clearly, I mean, we live in a city where gambling is prominently displayed on a big sign in a major building in town. Alcohol's at the grocery stores. I don't know. Those arguments don't resonate with me for the kind of the dangers of this substance. So I guess I would agree with Commissioner Beck about. My thought would be I'd advocate for the staff's recommendation, and I'd be in support of a 500-foot buffer between stores, and I'm not super comfortable with the idea of the additional sensitive uses.
What's the resolution number going to be for this? Thank you.
Well, I would echo Commissioner Janacek. You know, alcohol and tobacco is available on every corner. Alcohol is very dangerous. It's proven to kill a lot more people than marijuana, and it is a drug addiction, and tobacco kills you. So, you know, why are we deciding that marijuana is the big problem? And also, the sensitive uses kind of echo that too, talking about alcohol abuse centers. I mean, you can get alcohol anywhere, so those people have to deal with it.
Yeah. It's not like they're not going to go by the liquor stores there.
Well, the people voted to put liquor in every grocery store a few years ago, so.
I mean, is there any data to support the sensitive, like, are there any studies? I mean, we see the site from the Washington Policy Institute, but that's really the only data that comes in regarding these sensitive areas. So, I mean, what more data do we need, though? Is there any out there?
I don't think there is any. And I think that if we're going to make the regulations more restrictive than the state, we need a compelling public reason to do so.
Okay.
And a compelling public reason, in my mind, is evidence-based. And so far, the track record is not providing that evidence. So for me, I'd actually like to, I'm going to go ahead and put a move on the
motion.
A motion on the dais for folks to consider. I motion that Resolution 1802, a resolution recommending the City Council amend the existing recreational marijuana regulations related to the number of retail sales stores, allowed to be a maximum of 10 and shall be 500-foot buffer from other stores. I need to rewrite this. The bottom line is I think that we need to eliminate from the resolution under whereas the findings section, number 12, so this is how I would amend it, as well as eliminate on the whereas conclusion section, bullet number 6, and the now therefore planning resolves the following, eliminate bullet number 3. I think that we should just reduce the 2,500-foot separation to be a 500-foot separation and call it good. So however that needs to be worded as a resolution, that would be the motion I am making.
I'd second that motion.
Any discussion on the motion on the table? Commissioner Zielinski?
Yeah, I have a little different perspective on this. I'm okay with going to 10 stores, and I'm okay with reducing the buffer from 2,500, or the separation between stores from 2,500 to 500. But I support the sensitive uses buffer. And in fact, I was going to ask the staff about the question of churches came up. And I think churches are frequently used for purposes similar to what schools are used for, which is a listed sensitive use in the state law, I believe. And I was just wondering if the staff had considered adding churches to its list of sensitive uses, and if so, why it didn't recommend that.
That was not recommended because frankly, we didn't have a discussion about churches being a sensitive land use, but it's based upon the testimony that you heard tonight and the recommendation to include services, or facilities that serve youth organizations, you can certainly make the case that many churches do.
And some of the, because I served on a committee in Marysville that, has outlawed marijuana, whatever, but a lot of the concern for the proponents there was that anybody can register as a church. So it might not necessarily be a large facility that actually serves youth, but it could be some other group of, folks that gather. And
storefront church kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Those types of things. So that was the concern I got from the proponents at that time. So
back in 20,
likely.
I think we discussed this in terms of churches, and I think Commissioner Holland made the same point at that time, that the concern is the number of, what it takes in terms of to locate a church.
And not all churches aren't monolithic. They're not going to have all the exact same belief sets. I grew up in a very liberal church that would really not care at all if there was a marijuana dispensary across the street. It didn't impact it wasn't a core issue for them.
Wouldn't a church with a daycare or with a youth program fall under other categories here?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you were offering daycare services and those types of things, yeah.
But that would be the case under state law, though,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so we're not, I
Correct.
mean,
Yeah,
if we were to approve the current motion as it was proposed.
We still have to follow
we still-
state
yeah,
regulations.
There's still,
Correct.
the state standards, the state regulations would apply.
So if I may ask, then out of going back to the state regulations, how much of the state regulations then would also cover the sensitive areas that we talked about before? I mean, we mentioned childcare, daycares would encompass some of the churches that we were talking about, which encompass some of the primary concerns. I mean, would state regulations for setbacks also encompass the additionally stipulated sensitive land use items and kind of make them, adding them in additionally unnecessary?
No.
I mean, was that?
No, they do not.
Okay.
Commissioner Tisdale?
Everybody's different. I don't really have an issue with the 502. It's been spoken about that it's passed, and the comments about you can buy this and that in the grocery store and all of those things. I really think what we're missing here, folks, is our image. And, I work with a lot of site locators, and those are people that choose where they're going to locate their business. And if we're really serious about wanting to become this vibrant place, we all know one of the things we need to do is raise the income level. So we need to attract a different kind of person that's here. We also, if we're going to attract the businesses that are going to employ our kids and our grandkids, those people, they have a choice where they locate. And if you look at right now, Everett is always the first choice. And you add some of these things to this, and I can tell you, it is one of the questions that you get asked, and it's not so much specifically around 502 or the retail stores, but it's just that image that it puts out. And I'm not saying none. I'm not opposed to the 5 that are here, but I don't know that more really helps us accomplish what we need to accomplish. One of the gentlemen earlier spoke about it in economic development. This folks decided that they were going to locate their business here. He's probably got 4 or 5 or 6 suppliers that, are going to say, do we really want to locate here? So we're talking about all this science and all that stuff, and that's great. Science is good, but there's also reality, and there's also your image, and I don't really think that having more stores helps our image. I do support, churches, their classification of that I really think we need to look at. And so that's kind of where I'm at on this issue.
And I hear what you're saying, but I kind of disagree.
That's fine.
The city of Seattle, I think.
This isn't Seattle, this is Everett.
Well, but the point is, look at Seattle, look at Redmond, look at Kirkland.
Or not either of those.
We're talking about places that have a supply of 1 store to every 12,000 people, and they're vibrant, and I think we would fight for their economic development as a city, yet we're 1 store to every 20,000. So this argument really doesn't, I think there are other factors at play as to why Everett isn't this vibrant community, and they have a lot to do with our time is now starting to occur, and I doubt that number of retail marijuana stores is going to heavily influence a lot of businesses in terms of their business decisions. I've actually looked at economic development stats too. This is not a consideration for most of them.
You talk to different folks than I do.
I understand, and I understand there are people in the business development community that have strong feelings about this particular issue. But I think that the case examples from around the Puget Sound region make that a false argument. I mean, it just, the evidence isn't there that, you know, having a saturation of medical or retail marijuana stores somehow diminishes a city's image. Kirkland doesn't, I mean, they've decreased their buffers.
Any more discussion on the, Mr. Dunn?
Yeah, I would encourage my fellow commissioners to support the amendment and this ordinance as amended, including increasing the number of stores to 10 or the number determined by the state, Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board. Encourage you to reduce the minimum separation and to strike the sensitive use areas.
Any more discussion before we call for the vote? Seeing none, call for the vote. Gabby?
Commissioner Lark?
Yes.
Commissioner Yanasak?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra?
Yes.
Commissioner Zielinski?
No.
Commissioner Tisdale?
No.
Commissioner Beck?
Yes.
Chair Holland?
Yes. Thanks, great discussion. Thanks everyone for coming and testifying today.
Jury's gonna be set in this quadrant.
We do have one other item on the agenda tonight, which is Title 15.
Agenda item, I don't know where everyone.
Local project review procedures. So we'll let the room clear a little bit. And
Thank you very much.
are you ready?
Are you ready?
Yes.
By Tony Grander.
So the next item is a conversation about Title 15 local project review procedures. And as a result of the Metro Everett plan and the off-street parking requirements, there's quite a few places throughout the new chapters that we've done some things different in the use tables, but also where we have some flexibility in the code that provides some discretion to the planning director or to the city engineer. And so tonight kind of want to walk through some of these things where identify those review processes. So in Chapter 19, which is the use tables for Metro Everett, we have new terms in there called permitted, administrative, and conditional use. And currently we use a process out of state law that's called Review Process 1, Review Process 2, Review Process 3. In essence, Review Process 1 is administrative decision. There's no public notice required, and there's typically not very much discretion within that. Review Process 2, it's subject to public notice, and there is discretionary approval to that. So we give notice, we put up boards on the property and mail to adjacent property owners. Review Process 3 is subject to hearing and approval of the hearing examiner. Excuse me. So in Chapter 19, everywhere where we say administrative use, and you see in a little matrix that are attached to your thing is, it just depends on whether, where it's categorized. So administrative use would be a Review Process 1, so that'd be a staff decision. Review Process 2 would be a staff decision, but it gives notice to adjacent property owners and a sign posted. And Review Process 3 is a hearing examiner decision with a public hearing involved in that. And so as you walk through the different use tables, you can see where those are. And when we get back into the hearing on Chapter 19, when you look at those columns, again, those are the process, and that's really where we categorize the different review processes there. In Chapter 20, which is the development codes, there's quite a few areas where we have different areas of some kind of discretion where whether it's setback exceptions, so exceptions to the setback requirements, to design requirements, things like that. And we have all this matrix, and I'm just going to highlight those that we have recommended right now for going to the review process 2, which is again, the notice to adjacent property owners and a sign on it. So the first is at the bottom of the Chapter 20, on the bottom of page 1 of that. So any structure that retains fill greater than 6 feet in height, and so these are taller walls that are within a required setback area. So it's not just any wall, but it's anything that's within a required setback area. So there could be good reasons for that, but that is a review process too in our recommendations. The next is, earlier tonight, talked about the developer input, and so you recall in our Metro Everett we have a range of heights in quite a few areas, and so the taller buildings you can only get with providing incentives for that. And so that's a category for any project that goes above the base, is that we would also recommend that as being a review process too. So that would be, again, notice the adjacent property owners and a sign on the property. So, for example, in kind of the heart of downtown where we're at right now, the base height is 7 floors, but you can go up to 25 floors. So if someone came in with an 8-floor proposal, that would get a notice to adjacent property owners and a sign on the property. The other thing is, so any of these there are other standards within Chapter 20 that can be deviated from. So if they're not already spelled out with specific criteria, there's a process there. And so any of those other standards that might be modified would again be a review process too. So you see that at the bottom of page 5 in our recommendations. Flipping on the back, on page 6, we do have some things that are new standard, that uses that are not permitted in the zone, but for basements. This is an existing regulation in the B3 zone. I'm glad I'm looking at this as I'm rewriting the section of code, because I forgot to pull this back in. So it's good that we're doing this, so we catch that in the next version of this. So that's why it says to be added to regulations, because it doesn't exist in it right now. But is to have that standard to allow some flexibility in the basements. And then finally, any kind of building form standards and setbacks for structured parking would be a review process too as well, was our recommendation. When you look at Chapter 34 for off-street parking, we do have new flexibility in the off-street parking that allows the city engineer or the planning director in consultation with the city engineer to approve some modification to off-street parking, including a reduction up to 25% less that's in that table. Actually, it has any reduction could be proposed in there, and so we're proposing that if the reduction is greater than 25%, that go to a review process too. So some minor reductions could be staff decision, but the larger reductions would go to a public notice on that. Some modification for location of off-street parking. We have specific standards for where parking can be located within setback areas, things like that. And so any kind of modification of where that off-street parking can be located, we're recommending that as a review process too. And so you see all the other standards within the matrix, but those are the ones that were kind of floated to the top in our review of all the discretion that we felt that public notice and review of those things was essential. The other ones that we have review process 1, we feel like we have pretty good criteria that provides good guidance to staff on all those, and so we felt pretty comfortable with recommending review process 1. So after tonight's kind of briefing, the idea is to kind of draft the ordinance for these changes, and that becomes part of the overall Metro Everett and off-street parking package, which is going to be a doozy, and that's why we're briefing you often, so that we get some input early on some of this stuff and out in the public realm to have some discussion on it. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Commissioner Lark? I'm just kind of curious about what the standards are in other municipalities with regards to the amount of, so going back to parking 34.060A, if the reduction is 25% or less, it was review standard 1. If it's greater than 25%, it's review standard 2. What is the threshold or percentage of change in other municipalities? Is it 25% kind of the industry standard, or do other municipalities have higher thresholds?
Yeah, it's really all over the board. I think actually a lot of jurisdictions don't have flexibility. They require someone to get a variance and go through a public hearing and go to the hearing examiner. So I think Everett's actually always been, I mean, I've worked in quite a few jurisdictions, and this ability to have some flexibility and modification is a little bit unique than in my experience, to tell you the truth. So.
Well, I like the innovation, but
well, I can tell you in Marysville, it's, you know, you got to go to the hearing examiner to get any kind of reduction. You have to come up with a parking plan and other things, you know, that you have to incorporate into there. And I know Marysville is looking to try to amend the code so we don't have to do these types of hearings and make some logical decisions and administrative approvals. So
yeah, my other thought, I would love to get some feedback from other municipalities what those thresholds are, because if it's greater, I'd love to see the logic behind that, and you know, if it's maybe a 30% or 50% cutoff instead of 25%, or what are staff's thoughts on that?
Well, you have to probably first look at the standards that a given jurisdiction has. So, for example, Seattle, I understand yesterday they just had an amendment to eliminate parking standards for multifamily housing. Mm-hmm. And so that's one example of a city that doesn't allow modifications because they don't need them. If your requirement's 0, there's nothing to reduce. Or Tacoma, in their downtown, there's no minimum off-street parking required for any specific land use. And so there's no need for a modification process. And different jurisdictions do it differently. Probably the ones that are a little bit more complex in size and makeup have lower parking standards if they have good transit service or higher densities, like a Seattle, or like you know, some of the other King County jurisdictions that have some larger cities.
And what about Kirkland, or would that be a comparable city to examine, or?
We don't know. We'd have to take a look and see.
Yeah. And I think of all the parking regulations I looked at, I don't think there's a general flexibility that I've seen in any of them. There's more of these standards of proximity to transit, things like that, but anything outside of those things requires, as Chair Holland said, is going to the hearing examiner, having a public hearing, and thousands of dollars in the application.
And my second follow-up question also is regards to the same question, but for height, the height standards as well. You know, what are other municipalities doing with regards to, or is this unique in ours as well for the height incentives?
Well, again, kind of like the parking standard, you have to look at each jurisdiction and what their height standards are to begin with. If you look I'll give you a good example, just a conversation I had with the planner from Bellevue. Their code had a maximum height of 400 feet. There was no flexibility allowed there. Developers are building at 400 feet, which, you know, kind of is just mind-boggling to me in Everett. So they raised their code. They raised their code to 600 feet, and now they've got applications for 600-foot tall buildings. But it's a different market. I mean, it's you know, there are probably different ways to look at that, and every jurisdiction is a little bit different. It'd be hard to find probably a practice that across jurisdictions that stands out as the norm, unless it's a variance process where you have to go to a public hearing.
Last question, I promise. Was there any discussion amongst staff because we've split the parking requirements into review process 1, review process 2 for reductions or changes of up to 25%. Was there any discussion in staff for having that split for height incentives at a certain, after a certain amount of, or increase in percentage of height, then it would move to review process 2, and then prior to that would be review process 1?
So in the height incentives, actually, as part of the package that you'll see in the next round, and again, in response to the developers meeting here, we're also going to see some changes to the upper floor modulation requirements that we had. So it's going to become more of a design review process. And so actually, when you think about us removing those standards and the height incentives are going to be married at the same level. And so it's going to be a little bit more of a public notice design review type of thing, but without a formal design review hearing and things like that. So those standards are kind of lining together to provide some flexibility between height incentives and design issues. So right now our proposal is trying to tie those two together.
Roger that, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Tisdale?
On your TDMs, so it says it must be reviewed and approved. What if I'm building a building on speculation?
And you want to reduce parking requirements?
Yeah, yes.
Well, you're going to have to identify some uses to get reduced parking. I mean, no matter what, you're coming in, you're going to have to identify what the parking, something for that use. So a range of uses.
If I build it as a retail, speculative retail.
Okay, so 1 per 400 is the proposal.
Right,
but in downtown, that's not the case. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
But so what would I do for my TDM when I don't know what who my tenant's going to be?
So,
I'd build to the max.
Yeah, I mean, you might not even know it before occupancy, but we're actually have drafted a provision in the TDM to have a 2-phase TDM plan. So we have one at time of building permit that's a preliminary plan, but then have one at time of certificate of occupancy. So if you don't know your tenant at that point, you're still going to have to somehow narrow it down, and
right.
they're subject to annual review and things like that. So
right, but that's part of that, getting that spec guys to come to town. It's
yeah.
The other one you talked about was, if I understood, so the question that was raised at the developer meeting about the cost of doing all this pretty stuff, that will now go through design. Did I hear that correct?
Well, yeah, not really design review, but what we're doing is we're taking that upper floor modulation, and I don't bring the standards, but I think maybe starting at 8 floors, or actually maybe starting at 6 or 7 floors, I can't remember what we just did, kind of thing, but somewhere in the upper floor range, and taking that off, and then, but it's actually really well tied to the incentive heights thing, so that by taking that off and anyone getting above those heights, they're going to have to ask for an incentive, which then is a review process too, and so there will be some public review of that, but it's still a staff decision. So it's not required to have a public hearing and things like that. But allows us to have the conversation with the developer about heights, allows the public to kind of weigh in on those issues as well.
And then the other big thing I think we heard from most of the developers there is, you know, I've got to do all this stuff to get someplace. Is there thinking at staff about how do we do something about what we heard?
Yeah, so we worked on that today for some amended standards. So again, you'll see that next week. But
coming at us, okay.
We're looking at taking the caps off and upping the ratios in a few of the categories so that you could be more additive and get to that. So that was great input, and that's why we had that meeting, was to hear some of those details.
Because some of this doesn't get them there, so.
Yeah, and we're hoping that these adjustments will get there, but again, we're going to have, 2 rounds of another public input, and hoping that people will hone in a little bit more and give us feedback on did we fix it or make it worse, or still improvements necessary.
Okay, thank you.
I'm assuming, just one quick, I'm assuming that everyone that was at the meeting got the email from, and I'm going to not be able to pronounce his name. Is that something, Elsie, you can send to the rest of the planning commissioners? I'm just assuming the 4 that were there received it and directly, I'm assuming they got the sign-in sheet or something and sent that out. I haven't reviewed it yet, but it was directly based on review of the initial draft or whatever else.
Yeah, we can make sure the rest of the planning commission gets that.
Okay, thank you.
Tangentially related to some of the height incentives, I'm very curious. There was a question around public amenities and talking around green space, but the accessibility of that green space. Specifically, we're citing the Bosco Verticale in Milan and talking about accessibility of that. Has staff talked anything about that? This is really just a point of curiosity for me because I thought it was a very interesting question because it's green space, it's providing that green amenity, but people can't actually go up and reach and touch the green space because it's 10 stories up. So was there any conversation about that at all for staff? And if not, that's not the most pressing thing.
Well, we've done some adjustments to the green space. So first off, we increased the ratio. When you see this letter, actually, there's some details in there about the ratio and how that doesn't work if it's on the ground, at least, because you'll never be able to build anything to get another floor. So that was, again, good input. So we've increased the ratios. But there are a couple things also in the green space is that first off, you can do the upper floors, so the upper thing. So people that do green roofs, it could be, that was some input that we got from the public early in the process is, how about if we have parks at the top? We have taller buildings, open that up there. But we can also do a fee in lieu of, and so people can pay to the city and provide funds that can go for the city enhancing street trees downtown, to enhancing public parks, to buying other spaces and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a park impact fee that allows for some other ways to achieve that. So you don't necessarily have to provide it on site. You might be able to provide it within the area.
And the city doesn't currently have a park impact fee, that's correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, I like this. This is very seamless and easy to read, and I think it transitions from what we currently have in terms of building stock to where we want to go. I know we can't jump and say no regs for parking. Hopefully one day we will, but I think where you're headed in terms of creating some exceptions that you anticipate and creating a menu of those is terrific. And then I think the other escape hatch, which is if you want to go through the public process and you don't want to go through a hearing examiner and go that far down the process, there is the other option. So, but this is very easy to read and understand. A lot of hard work, I know, putting things on diets.
We spent more time making it easy than not, so I tell you that. So,
well,
yeah.
If it's any consolation, I can understand it. So
good.
Good that it's easy.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Zielinski?
I just wanted to commend the staff on the material that you put together for us for this marijuana discussion. I think that was, everything was excellent. It's what we asked for, and it was made our job a lot easier up here.
Thank you.
Is there any other business tonight, Alan? Oh, yes. Would you like to address us on the Metro Everett there? Sorry about that.
It's late.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Victor Harris, 3017 Lombard in beautiful downtown Everett. One thing that caught me on this, this proposal here, I believe it's a proposal, was 2405D blank walls. And it strikes me because I had this conversation today. We have had 2 fires in downtown Everett very recently. One of them, the wall of the building that was remained standing had to be removed and rebuilt. Now that's a new wall. The other fire site, the old walls still stand, but there's still scorch marks. Whether it's just, light dusting of ash or flames or whatever.
Thank you.
I wrestle with this idea of those grandfathered buildings and a replacement wall isn't a new wall or a new building. But these buildings, these walls are now exposed, and my guess is they're going to be exposed for over 10 years. They're blank walls. Is there any way that we can incorporate something in the code to address any property, whether it's a 50-year-old building or if it's a 10-year-old building, that when the neighboring building comes down and your wall is exposed, then you must update your wall so that it's no longer a blank wall and conforms to the rest of the stuff? For many things that we've heard on non-conforming uses, yes, I understand that, but for something, when we're talking about visual aesthetics, I think there's something that we need to address here to ensure that we're not looking at blank walls, whatever age the building is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, just to comment on that a little bit, I think most of those walls that you see, especially in downtown, it will be, you know, a structural wall where you can't have openings. The building code wouldn't allow you to have openings because you're going to have a building that's going to be put right next to it. So fire ratings and stuff, you couldn't do that. But, you know, and I don't know how Everett feels about murals and other kind of painting or things like that on the walls. But anyway, but thank you for the comment. Any other business from the commission? Okay, I guess we're adjourned. Thank you.
Good meeting.